The Studies of Fernando Sor. To the misery of Fernando Sor's final days of poverty and sickness in Paris was added the irritation of his landlady's insistence, repeated on almost every humiliating encounter, that his studies should have names. It began one morning when Madame Renard sidled into Sor's dark room, along with the porter who delivered water to the old apartments at 34 Marché Saint-Honoré. Sor was playing one of the many studies he had composed for his students, and Madame Renard waited, standing with her head to one side to signal her attentiveness, till the final notes plucked from the worn gut strings had faded. Sor, after taking several long breaths, gracefully raised himself from his reverential pose over his guitar, and then Madame Renard, in a voice surprisingly strong and deep in such a tiny woman, said, "Monsieur Sor, what's the name of the lovely song you were playing?" "It is a study, Madame Renard, study number 12, Sor replied in his careful, formal French. "But what's its name?" "That is its name. It is study number 12. "But it's such a pretty song. Surely it must have a name." Madame Renard appeared to listen while Sor explained the instructional functions of studies and why they were numbered sequentially. She pursed her small mouth, her habitual expression suggesting a sanitary barrier against the distasteful. When he concluded, she said, "But it's so pretty. It makes me think of two young lovers who've gone to the seaside and are walking hand in hand along the shore. It should have a name, like the Sweethearts' Promenade." "It is not about sweethearts," said Sor, still seated, holding his guitar, his posture balanced and his intelligent hands resting in perfect position, out of a habit acquired over years of intense training. "It is about the slur and the use of the thumb to distinguish a particular voice." After Madame Renard took her leave, following that first discussion of the studies, Sor leaned over his guitar and wept, not with simple tears, but painful, confusing gasps of shame and failure. Who can say with confidence why that unremarkable conversation should have upset him so? Perhaps his reaction can be attributed simply to exhaustion, coming not after a sudden burst of energy, but rather from years of struggle against a ubiquitous though inscrutable power. Sor had never ceased to feel his long exile from Spain. He had been forced into discomforting expediencies while seeking patronage in the midst of revolutions, wars, and violent dynastic disputes, all seeming perfectly timed to steal his strength and destroy the security he needed to practice his art. When he settled at last in Paris in the early 1830s, he found that la guitare manie, as the fashionable passion for Sor's instrument was known, had begun to wane, just when he was most in need of money to support himself and meet the substantial expenses of bringing his cherished daughter, Caroline, into society. Sor's publishers had exploited him. He had no savings, and his income had gradually diminished while his debts had grown. Then, freedom from his responsibility to his daughter had arrived, not with the happy marriage he so wished for her, but through her death from a swift and mysterious illness. After pouring his sorrow into a mass in Caroline's honor, Sor lapsed into inactivity, failing even to keep up with the teaching of the few enthusiastic students who had stayed with him, though the popularity of his instrument had passed. Finally, the day had come when Sor could not pay for his lodging. In an awkward conversation with Madame Renard, it became implicit that the rent would be made up in the prestige of Sor's continued tenancy, though he would have to move to his current room from the more spacious accommodations he had shared with his daughter. But Madame Renard immediately began to presume upon their unstated agreement, and to seek occasions to engage Sor in conversation. She longed for social assent, and had cunning enough to work into her comments the suggestion of a threat. Perhaps, after all, it is not difficult to understand how a conversation that in previous years would only have drawn a smile from the good-natured maestro would now strike him as the cruel joke of an abdicating deity.